I didn't realize my marriage had an expiration date until I saw the messages she forgot to delete. They weren't dramatic. No shouting. No hearts. No obvious betrayal that movies prepare you for. Just calm sentences sitting quietly on a screen, written by someone who thought I would never see them. Someone who thought time was on her side. I stood in our bedroom with the lights off, the glow from the tablet washing over my hands, and felt something inside me settle into place. Not anger. Not sadness. Understanding. And that was worse. Before I go any further, stop for a second and tell me, where are you watching from right now? Because this story only really lands if you've ever felt like someone close to you was silently deciding whether you were worth staying with. That afternoon started the way all family milestones in my life did, polished, controlled, and already decided. My parents had invited us over to talk about the future. Those words always meant the same thing. Decisions made behind closed doors. Smiles rehearsed. Outcomes framed as fairness. My older brother, Ryan, was already there when we arrived, stretched comfortably across the couch like he owned the place. In a way, he always had. My wife, Claire, squeezed my hand as we stepped inside, but her grip was light. Distracted. I told myself she was nervous for me. The house looked perfect. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Clean lines. Furniture that looked expensive without trying. Framed photos of Ryan everywhere, graduations, promotions, holidays where he stood in the center and the rest of us formed a loose background. I took a seat at the edge of the couch, spine straight, hands folded. I'd learned early that taking up too much space made people uncomfortable. My father cleared his throat. My mother smiled the way she did when she was about to say something that couldn't be undone. "We've decided to settle things now," my father said. "So there's no confusion later." A folder slid across the coffee table toward Ryan. Thick. Heavy. The kind that makes a sound when it lands. Ryan didn't look surprised. He opened it slowly, deliberately, like he was savoring the moment. The house. Fully transferred. Prime location. My mother leaned over and kissed his cheek, already talking about renovations, about how nice it would be for future kids. Ryan smiled easily, confident, relaxed. Like this was simply the natural order of things. Then my father turned to me. "Mark," he said, pushing a much thinner folder in my direction. "Your grandfather left you the land." Just like that. No build-up. No explanation. Just paper. I opened the folder and stared at the deed. 40 acres in a rural county most people only recognized from highway signs. An abandoned property that hadn't been farmed in decades. No house worth mentioning. No infrastructure. Just land everyone had quietly agreed wasn't worth much. I waited. For another folder. For clarification. For something that would make this feel balanced. Nothing came. On the drive home, Claire was quiet. Not angry. Not supportive either. She stared out the window while traffic crawled past us, her reflection faint against the glass. I told myself she was processing. That she was being considerate. That the tightness in my chest was just embarrassment working its way out. Then she spoke. "So," she said carefully, like she was choosing each word. "What do you think you'll do with it?" I said we could sell it. That land was still land. That maybe it was worth something. I didn't sound convincing, and I knew it. She nodded, but there was something in her expression I couldn't place. Not disappointment. Calculation. At home, she said she needed a shower. I sat on the edge of the bed, the deed folded in my hands, waiting for it to explain itself. The house felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in on you. Later that night, I reached for her tablet on the nightstand to check our shared calendar. The screen lit up and synced automatically. Notifications flickered. Messages loaded. Old ones. Archived ones. Ones she thought were gone. The first line stopped me cold. "Let's see what he actually gets before you decide." My throat tightened. I scrolled. There were conversations with her sister. With a close friend whose name I barely recognized. All circling the same subject. Me. My future. My usefulness. If it's just worthless land, I can't do this forever. I love him, but love doesn't pay for the life we talked about. Ryan's life is what stability looks like. I didn't finish reading right away. My hands were shaking too much. She hadn't been supporting me. She'd been waiting. Waiting to see if I was worth staying with. When she came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her hair, she stopped short when she saw my face. I was sitting on the bed, tablet in my hands. The silence between us stretched. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I asked one question. "How long were you planning this?" She didn't deny the messages. She didn't even look surprised. She sat down slowly and started explaining. She said she was scared. She said she was being realistic. She said she didn't mean for me to see them like that. Each sentence landed softer than the last, like she was trying to cushion something sharp. I listened. I nodded. And when she finally stopped talking, the quiet said everything she hadn't. She packed that night. She said she needed space. She said we should think. She said she didn't know who I was going to become. I stood there and watched her fold clothes into a suitcase, realizing she'd already imagined this moment long before I ever had. I didn't stop her. When the door closed, it didn't slam. It clicked softly, like a decision already finalized somewhere else. I stood alone in the bedroom, the deed still on the nightstand, understanding something I'd never allowed myself to before. My marriage hadn't ended because life got hard. It ended because I'd been evaluated, and found uncertain. And as I stared at that thin folder everyone had dismissed, one thought kept circling in my head. If this land really was worthless, why had my grandfather held on to it for so long? That question followed me into the night. And it was about to change everything. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was replaying the messages, those had already burned themselves into my head, but because every quiet moment kept dragging one question back to the surface. If the land was truly worthless, why had my grandfather refused to sell it for decades? He'd been offered money more than once. I remembered that much. I just never asked why he always said no. By morning, I realized something else. I hadn't lost anything that night. I'd just stopped pretending. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Ryan. And I definitely didn't call my wife. I packed a bag, folded the deed carefully, and slid it into the glove compartment of my car. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet. I just knew staying put would turn me into someone I didn't want to be. Before I continue, let me ask you something. What would you have done at that point? Would you have chased answers, or distance? Drop a comment and tell me, because that decision matters more than it seems. Highways blurred into long stretches of road. Billboards disappeared. Cell service weakened. The farther I drove, the quieter my head became. For the first time since the inheritance, no one was watching me. No one was measuring outcomes. When I finally reached the property, my chest tightened, not with hope, but recognition. This was it. The farmhouse leaned at an angle that made it look tired of standing. One corner of the roof had collapsed inward, exposing beams gray with age. The barn wasn't much better. Fences sagged, broken in places where no one had bothered to fix them. Weeds ruled the fields like they'd claimed victory long ago. I stood there with my hands on my hips, taking it all in, and felt something close to bitter amusement. This was what my wife had been weighing in those messages. This was the future she'd been waiting to see before deciding whether I was worth staying married to. I walked the property slowly. The ground crunched under my boots, dry in some spots, strangely firm in others. The air smelled like dust and old wood. Silence hung heavy, broken only by wind pushing through gaps in the barn. I pulled out my phone and called a local land agent whose number I'd saved weeks earlier and never used. If I want to sell, I asked, how fast could it happen? He didn't hesitate. Fast, he said. But you won't like the number. How bad? A few thousand, maybe. Depends if anyone wants hunting land. Farming? No chance. A few thousand. I thanked him and ended the call, staring out over 40 acres that had just been assigned a value smaller than my brother's kitchen renovation. I told myself that was fine. That I wasn't here for validation. That I just needed closure. The next morning, the surveyor arrived. His name was Cole. Late 50s. Weathered face. Calm eyes. The kind of man who didn't rush conversations because he didn't need to impress anyone. He shook my hand and didn't say much at first. Just stood there, scanning the land like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. You sure you want to sell? He asked finally. Yes, I said too quickly. He nodded, but something about his expression shifted. Not disagreement. Curiosity. As he worked, I walked the perimeter alone. I tried to see what everyone else had seen when they dismissed this place. The decay. The neglect. The inconvenience. But the longer I looked, the more details started to stand out. Patches where the grass grew greener. Stones arranged in odd, deliberate lines near the creek. Areas my grandfather had always told us not to dig into as kids. At the time, I'd thought it was superstition. Cole stopped near the tree line and crouched down, brushing soil away with his hand. He frowned, scooped some dirt into a bag, sealed it carefully, and marked it with a pen. Is something wrong? I asked. He glanced up at me. Too early to say. That answer followed me the rest of the day. That night, I drove into the nearest town for food. A small diner sat at the corner of the main road, its sign flickering like it hadn't been updated in decades. Conversations quieted when I walked in. I took a seat at the counter, suddenly aware of how out of place I looked. You're Earl's grandson, aren't you? The waitress asked, already pouring coffee. I nodded. She smiled faintly. He was a stubborn man. Everyone says the land's worthless, I replied. She snorted. Worthless things don't attract buyers every year for 20 years. I froze. Buyers? I asked. Oh yeah, she said casually. Out-of-state types. Suits. Earl never sold. Said some things were better left buried. Those words followed me all the way back to the farmhouse. That night, Ryan called. So, he said. You done pretending yet? I didn't answer. The next morning, Cole returned. He didn't smile. Mark, he said, holding a thick folder. We need to talk. We sat on the porch, the wood creaking beneath us. He opened the folder slowly, deliberately, like he knew timing mattered. I ran independent tests, he said. Pulled old records. Cross-checked everything. My heart started pounding. Your land isn't dead, he continued. It's one of the most valuable plots I've surveyed in this region. The words didn't register right away. Valuable how? I asked. He met my eyes. Rare deposits. Deep. Concentrated. Worth a fortune. The porch felt like it tilted under me. I thought you should hear it from me first, he added. Because once this gets out, things are going to move fast. Images flooded my mind. My wife's messages. Ryan's smirk. My parents sliding that thin folder toward me like it was a consolation prize. My grandfather refusing to sell without ever explaining why. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just sat there, realizing the land my wife had judged me for might be the reason she'd never come back. And suddenly, I understood something else too. If the truth about this place became public, everyone who had dismissed me was going to want something from me. The question was whether I'd let them have it. And that decision was coming sooner than I expected. I didn't tell anyone what Cole had shown me. Not my parents. Not Ryan. And definitely not my wife. I stayed on the porch long after his truck disappeared down the dirt road, the folder resting on my knees like it weighed more than paper should. The land stretched out in front of me, quiet and unimpressed by the revelation it had just delivered. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt patient. Like it had been waiting for me to catch up. That night, I slept on the old mattress in the farmhouse, the kind that creaked when you shifted your weight. Wind pushed through gaps in the walls, making the place sound alive in a way that was almost unsettling. I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything backward. The messages. The inheritance. My grandfather's silence. It all lined up too neatly to be coincidence, and that thought kept me awake longer than fear ever could. By morning, my phone was already buzzing. Unknown number. I let it ring. Another call. Then a text. Is it true you had the land surveyed? I locked the screen and slipped the phone into my pocket. If Cole was right, information was already leaking. And if information was leaking, pressure would follow. I wasn't ready to be rushed. Before I go further, let me ask you something. If you suddenly found out everyone had underestimated you, would you correct them immediately, or would you wait and watch? Because I chose to wait, and that choice changed the balance more than I understood at the time. By midday, my mother called. Your father and I are worried, she said, skipping any pretense. Ryan said you're making decisions out there without guidance. I had the land surveyed, I replied. There was a pause. Too long to be casual. And, my father asked, his voice joining the call. It's worth more than we thought, I said carefully. How much more, my mother asked. Enough that I'm not selling it. Silence. Then my father laughed, a short sound that carried no humor. Don't be stubborn. You don't know how these things work. If there's value, we should handle it together. Handle it together. The same people who had handed my brother a house and me a problem suddenly wanted unity. I'll manage it, I said. You're being emotional, my mother snapped. This isn't about feelings. No, I replied calmly. It's about ownership. The call ended without goodbye. 2 hours later, Ryan showed up. I watched his car pull into the drive from the farmhouse window. Clean. Polished. Completely out of place. He stepped out wearing sunglasses and that familiar half-smile, like he'd arrived to fix something broken. Didn't think you'd stay, he said when I met him outside. Place smells like regret. What do you want? I asked. He shrugged. Mom and Dad are worried. And honestly, so am I. You don't know what you're doing. I crossed my arms. Funny. You didn't care when you thought it was worthless. His smile faltered for half a second. So it's true, he said. There's something here. Enough, I replied. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Look, I can help you. I know people. Investors. Lawyers. We could split it. Split it. Grandpa didn't leave it to you, I said quietly. He didn't leave it to you because you were special, Ryan snapped. He left it because you were the only one dumb enough to take it. I looked at him then, really looked at him. The expensive watch. The confidence built on approval. The certainty that someone else would always clean up the consequences. Get off my land, I said. His face hardened. You'll regret this. Maybe, I replied. But it won't be today. He left with gravel spinning under his tires, and for the first time since everything started, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Resolve. The calls escalated after that. Voicemails with polite voices. Emails warning me about zoning issues, permits, environmental reviews. Problems that hadn't existed yesterday suddenly became urgent today. Someone wanted me scared. Someone wanted me rushed. So I hired an attorney. Her name was Helen. She didn't know my family. She didn't care about history. She read through Cole's report twice, then leaned back in her chair and studied me like I was the variable in the room. You've been underestimated, she said. That works in your favor, but only if you stay quiet and patient. I followed her advice. I declined early offers without countering. I ignored deadlines that appeared out of nowhere. I let rumors circulate without confirming or denying anything. And slowly, I watched the tone change. My parents stopped advising and started asking. Ryan stopped mocking and started negotiating. And then my wife reached out. Her message came late one evening, just as the sun dipped below the fields. It was careful, thoughtful, full of reflection. I didn't know how strong you really were, she wrote. I was scared. I judged you based on what I thought life was supposed to look like. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because she was already too late to matter. She had made her decision back when she thought the land was worthless. Everything after that was just reaction. The first serious offer arrived the following week, delivered by courier like it was afraid of the mailbox. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee. I sat at the old kitchen table. I listened to the farmhouse creak around me like it was breathing. When I finally opened the envelope, the number inside almost made me laugh. It was high enough to change my life. It was also low enough to insult my grandfather. I folded the letter and set it aside. By noon, 3 more had arrived. That told me everything I needed to know. Because when everyone suddenly wants what they once ignored, it means the real game has finally started. And I was done playing by their rules. I didn't rush the ending. That was the mistake everyone else expected me to make. The letters kept coming. Some polite. Some urgent. Some dressed up as concern, warning me about consequences I didn't fully understand yet. Environmental reviews. Zoning complications. Market volatility. Words meant to create pressure without ever sounding like threats. Helen handled most of it. She filtered what mattered and let the rest die quietly in her inbox. Everyone wants speed, she told me during one call. That's how they get leverage. I'm not in a hurry, I said, looking out over the fields. She smiled through the phone. Good. That's why you're winning. A week later, my parents showed up together. They hadn't been to the property in over 20 years. My mother stepped out of the car first, city shoes sinking slightly into the dirt. She looked around like the land might accuse her of something. My father followed, hands in his pockets, scanning the farmhouse with an expression I couldn't read. This place isn't safe, my mother said immediately. Structurally. Environmentally. You shouldn't be here alone. I'm fine, I replied. We raised you better than this, my father said, frustration creeping into his voice. You're being stubborn for no reason. For a reason, I corrected. They followed me inside, wrinkling their noses at the dust and the half-finished repairs. They ignored the improvements I'd already started. It was easier to pretend nothing had changed. We want to help, my mother said, softer now. But you're shutting us out. I stopped and looked at her. Really looked. You shut me out first, I said. This is just later. My father exhaled slowly. If there's money here, it should benefit the family. It will, I replied. Hope flickered in his eyes. So you'll reconsider? Just not the way you expect, I said. They left without pressing further, but the silence they took with them felt heavier than the arguments ever had. The real offer arrived 3 days later. Not by courier. Not by email. An invitation. Private meeting. Neutral location. No paperwork up front. Helen raised an eyebrow when I showed her the message. This is where power shifts, she said. Go. But listen more than you talk. The office overlooked a river. Calm. Intentional. The man across from me didn't rush introductions. He didn't fill silence. He waited, watching me like he was recalibrating expectations in real time. You've been underestimated, he said finally. I didn't react. He slid a folder across the table. The number inside was staggering. Not just life-changing. Generational. The kind of figure that makes people forget who they were 5 minutes earlier. That's contingent on full rights, he added. No delays. No noise. I leaned back in my chair. No, I said. He blinked. Excuse me? No, I repeated. I'm not selling everything. He studied me again, slower this time. Most people don't say no to that number. I'm not most people, I replied. What do you want? He asked. I thought of my grandfather standing out on this land years ago, refusing offers without explaining himself. I thought of the messages my wife had written when she believed I was worth less than a gamble. I want control, I said. Phased development. Environmental oversight. Local investment. Transparency. A smile touched his face. You've done your homework. I've spent my life being told what things are worth, I said. I'm done outsourcing that. The negotiation lasted hours. When I walked out, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that I hadn't just protected the land. I'd claimed it. News traveled quickly after that. Not specifics. Just enough to shift tone. Pressure turned into respect. Demands turned into acknowledgments. Ryan stopped calling. My parents stopped advising. My wife tried one last time. Her message was longer this time. More reflective. She talked about fear, about expectations, about how she hadn't known how strong I really was. She said she wished she'd waited. That she'd trusted me. I deleted it without replying. Not out of cruelty. Out of closure. The partnership finalized quietly 3 months later. Not a sale. An agreement that kept ownership where it belonged. The first machine arrived at sunrise, rolling down the dirt road without ceremony. No press. No celebration. Just progress. I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee and watched it approach, feeling something finally settle inside me. This wasn't leverage anymore. This was real. I hired locals first. People who'd watched this land decay for years. People who remembered my grandfather turning buyers away without explanation. They didn't ask why he'd done it. They just nodded and said, Earl always knew something. Every contract included protections he would have approved of. Environmental safeguards. Community reinvestment. Local jobs before outsiders. Growth without erasure. Money came, but it didn't lead. It followed. My parents visited again months later. The land looked different then. Still rough. Still honest. But alive. Survey flags dotted the fields. Equipment rested near the barn like it had always belonged there. I never imagined this, my mother said softly. That's okay, I replied. You weren't supposed to. Ryan came last. He didn't bring jokes. He didn't bring arrogance. He brought paperwork. I want in, he said flatly, sliding a proposal across the table. I didn't look at it. You always do, he continued. This scale needs people like me. I met his eyes. No. You don't even know what I'm offering. I know who's offering, I said. That's enough. He leaned back, incredulous. You think Grandpa trusted you more? I know he did, I replied. Why? He asked quietly. I stood and walked him to the window, pointing toward the field where the first tests had been taken. Because when something looks worthless, you walk away, I said. And when something looks hard, I stay. He gathered his papers slowly, anger replaced by something closer to resignation. He left without another word. That evening, I drove to the far edge of the property where my grandfather used to sit on an overturned bucket and drink his coffee. I sat there until the sun dipped low, the land glowing gold. They thought he'd left me nothing. They thought he'd punished me. But he'd done something else entirely. He'd given me space to be overlooked. To be tested. To decide who I was when no one was watching. And now that everyone was, it was already too late to take it away. The real inheritance wasn't buried beneath the ground. It was knowing I'd been trusted when no one else trusted me. And that was something no one could ever reclaim. Before you go, let me know where you're watching from. Share it with someone who's still waiting for their moment. Stories like this deserve to reach the people who need them.